Hello and welcome everyone. It's Fast Kareem with Learnit, and today I want to start talking a little bit about Excel 2021. This class will focus on the beginner topics of Excel 2021, like the user interface, spreadsheet design, and formatting. However, in October of 2021, as we all know, Microsoft released Windows 11, and alongside it came Office 2021, where you can buy a standalone version of Office with a set of features instead of opting in for Office 365, which some organizations do because they can purchase a subscription for Microsoft. And when they get the subscription, they get updates to these softwares regularly, where Office 2021 comes out with a set of features and there's no updates after that. Now, in these sessions, we have an Excel beginner, intermediate, even expert session that we're going to cover. We have a set of topics. Now, in this course, I broke up the topics into two different what I call modules, where the first module is going to cover Excel essentials, the user interface, some basic features that we should know about, basic maneuvering, keyboard shortcuts, and some formulas, the basics of them: max, min, sum, count. In Module 2, I also want to spend some time and just start talking about formatting, how to design a spreadsheet using certain tools, how to set up a page, how to go to page print preview. Now, this class is also designed to be a little hands-on, meaning I recommend you to pause the video after I show you something, and I even say that sometimes in the video, to try, to give a practice, maybe building the formula that you just saw me see, or use the keyboard shortcut that I'm using. So with that being said, don't be shy to open up your Excel, your Office 2021, and practice these things. In this beginner course, I will be building the spreadsheet entirely from scratch. There isn't an exercise file, but we'll be building it from scratch from a blank workbook. I'm pretty excited to get started. Let's go ahead and begin. So I just launched Excel, and as soon as you launch these Office products, since 2013 in fact, you get taken to a screen that's known as the Start screen. There has been some updates here and there to it throughout the years, but it's looking like they left most of it the same, if not almost all of it the same this year in Office 2021. But let's talk a little bit about the Start screen, and on the left-hand side, you're going to notice that there's three areas you can navigate to. One being Home, the other one being New, where you can access your templates and build a new workbook, or even open an existing workbook directly from your computer. Let's talk a little bit about each one of these tabs before we move forward to a blank workbook and discover the new Office 2021 user interface. Now, when you end up clicking on Home here, it's going to show you an area where you can access your new built-in templates, or you can browse online for some pre-existing templates that Microsoft has available for you. And if you've saved any personal templates, you can also access them directly from here. I just don't have any saved yet. Now, besides actually going to Home and having this area for templates, you also have a search box to browse templates, and if you've opened any recent workbooks, you're going to see them listed here. You can also pin them to this area to keep them nicely, conveniently accessible, and you can browse the workbooks that people have shared with you through maybe OneDrive or Outlook directly from here. So the home page is a nice area to get started. And when you click on New, it just shows you the templates that we just saw on the home page. And Open, of course, is going to show you an area where you can browse your cloud services like maybe SharePoint or OneDrive, or even browse your PC to select the file or a workbook and open it, or even access your autosave workbooks. In case there's been a crash, you can recover any unsaved workbooks directly from here. Very powerful feature. So a lot to discover here in the Start screen. Not too many changes that I've seen. We still have our account where we can sign into directly from the top hand side, which I'm already signed in as. We still have the Excel options at the very bottom. We have our account information at the bottom where we can give that a click. And here we can see that I have my Office Home and Business 2021 license there. I'm not going to change the theme. I'm going to leave it as the colorful theme since we're talking about the software today, but there are quite a few different themes that we can change this software application to. Or even the backgrounds. We can have an office background, like right now I have this clouds. I can customize it and have no backgrounds, keep it nice and simple there. So, we just did a little tour of the start screen. It's useful to know about. It's a good area to get started. But now that we've done that, I just want to start talking a little bit about my favorite template, probably the one I use the most, the blank workbook. Because in this course, I want to talk about quite a few features in Excel. And how I do that is I want to build a spreadsheet that actually tracks the sales of a restaurant that I'm building. The restaurant's called Faz Food. And I'm just going to track some weekly sales, see how much I made for the month, see who sold the most food, who sold the least food, maybe hand out bonuses, depending on that. And I want to build a spreadsheet that I could eventually hopefully print and put on my bulletin board every month. Now, hopefully the spreadsheet's reusable. It has colors and it's pretty, it's formatted, so that way I can put it front facing and print it. And hopefully it all fits on one page. So we want to talk about all those features that allow us to do that using this newer interface that we have. Now, let me click on a blank workbook here and give you a tour of the Office 2021 user interface. I went ahead and launched the blank workbook. And now that I'm in a blank workbook, I just want to talk a little bit about the Office interface because there has been some changes to it. As you all know, the Windows 11 look is quite drastically different than Windows 10. It has much softer bezels, looks like a much more lighter tone, and it has an overall different experience to it. And I've noticed they kind of mimic that look with these Office products. And they actually have a newer interface for the ribbon. Kind of looks more protruded out there, as you can see, with the tabs kind of sticking out a little bit differently than they used to be. And then, of course, we're always going to have our command groups still, where we have the labelings on the bottom. We have our command groups. So there is a lot going up there with the new Office 2021 ribbon. Now, one thing I want you to notice, though, with this Office 2021 ribbon is that there's actually no quick access toolbar anymore. There used to be a set of tools that we can actually add here. This might alarm people. And don't worry, I've actually found out you can turn it back on. So if you are one of those people that are familiar with the quick access toolbar and you notice you just upgraded and you don't have it anymore, I do want you to feel free to pause the video and first watch what I do and then go add the quick access toolbar to your user interface because I do enjoy using it. Let me go ahead and right click one of these tabs so that I can customize the ribbon. And from there, I actually have an option to specifically customize the quick access toolbar. And now in Office 2021, they're actually going to ask you to, well, turn on the Show Quick Access Toolbar setting. And you can choose the position above or below the ribbon. I'm going to put mine above the ribbon and hit OK. So now I have my quick access toolbar options there where I can add them directly to the top where they used to be there. I can also right click and pin some items there from my toolbar and the ribbon in the command groups as well. So if you do enjoy using your quick access toolbar, I highly recommend to just give this video a pause and go to your ribbon and right click a tab. Just right click any tab, it doesn't matter which one it is, and customize the ribbon so that you can access the quick access toolbar settings. And on the very bottom there, you just have to check mark it on and choose if you want it above or below the ribbon, and hit OK. Glad you did that. If you didn't, it's okay. Maybe one day you will. If not, maybe you like the minimalistic look. Now, I also want to mention that if you want to hide your ribbon, we have a little area there, a little drop down where we can select it. And now we have these settings for the ribbon. We can always show the ribbon. That's my preferred setting. We have a full screen mode, which hides the ribbon until you click on the top. We also have an option for show tabs in case you're on a mobile device or a little laptop. That way you have a small screen, you can save some real estate. So as you click, it shows you the tools. I'm going to always go to always show ribbon though. And I like how they conveniently left hide the quick access toolbar option and show the quick access toolbar option directly there so we can quickly add and remove those toolbars that we have. Pretty interesting. I also want to point out the bottom of our workbook, where our sheet names are, has a little bit more of a rounded bezel look instead of a square look. We can still add our sheets, and of course if you do a right click in this area, you're still going to get the activate window, which is going to be a vertical list of all the sheet names in the workbook. I'm going to take advantage of the zoom slider here. This zoom slider, and I'm going to zoom into the spreadsheet so that we can begin maneuvering around Excel. Great. Nice and zoomed into my spreadsheet here. I'm on cell A1, that's what my name box is showing me. And the cool thing about Excel is today, at any point in time, if you ever want to look for a certain feature, they also have a search box at the very top of the ribbon. This has been here for quite a few iterations now, but it's worth a mention, where you can search for certain features. And even if you need help on them, receive help on them by looking into the Microsoft support articles that open up pretty natively within the software. This is a quick little article on Power Pivot, a great tab that you can use for your pivot tables. I'll go ahead and close that there. So, not many changes to the user interface, but it does have a nice, clean, refreshed look. I want to say the biggest thing that you're going to notice is that your ribbon display options have now moved, and your quick access toolbar is now able to be turned on or off, which is something that we couldn't previously do. Go ahead and pause the video, open up a workbook, play around, take a look at your user interface, set up the settings for your quick access toolbar. I'm going to save my workbook here. I'm going to go ahead and call it the Faz Food monthly sales. So that we can get started. Hopefully you do the same. So now I actually want to begin by typing in these cells and creating the spreadsheet that I would like. And I'm going to do that by adding a title to my spreadsheet. I'm just going to call this one Faz Food. And I'm just going to put on the bottom there, always fresh. And why not, always Faz? That's me. Now, when I hit enter here, I just want to point out for people, when you hit enter in Excel, that actually moves down something known as your cell address box, which is that green box there. And the enter key is how we navigate and essentially move it down a cell space. So I'm going to hit enter just one more time because I do want to add some headers to my spreadsheet because I want to actually track the salespeople. And I just want to do a week by week breakdown. And now that I've actually added in salesperson, I just want to mention another little shortcut that I use. Because I did move over to this cell over here. I moved basically to the right. That's what I essentially did. I moved over And in order to do that, I simply clicked on the Tab key, and that actually went ahead and moved me to the right hand side. Now, of course, if I hold down to Shift and Tab, that's actually going to move me back to the left. Same thing with Enter. Extremely useful to navigate with shortcuts, especially when you get to more advanced topics like an Excel expert when we talk about macros. So now that I have this here, I actually want to add in a quick little column for week 1. And I notice when we are typing in spreadsheets, there are certain situations where words get cut off in the cell. And that's not a big deal. I mean, there's many ways we can fix this, but this might happen all over the place. It might happen over several different columns. We can always go to the top of each one of these columns where the letters are. That's where the column is. And between them, you can always expand them to make them bigger or smaller. However, I've always dealt with situations where I have multiple columns. Multiple columns that have that situation. Like this column and this column now. And I like to mention in my beginner courses that there's this little triangle here next to your column headers. And you give it a little click, it's going to select all the columns and all the rows in the entire sheet. And if you go ahead and do a double click in between one of the columns or one of the rows, it's going to give you a best fit for the entire spreadsheet, since everything's selected for entire columns or for the entire rows. So notice how the salesperson column is nice and large simply because it takes the place of the largest cell and it fits the column to that size. Where B and C fit the cell size of week 1 and week 2. So always remember, if you need to quickly fix a spreadsheet sizing for these cells, or if you see a lot of pound signs or hash signs within cells when you have numbers, it's just letting you know that these cells are too small to display something for you. And you might want to quickly click on that triangle and do a double click on the rows or the columns, depending on what situation it is, to quickly get it fixed for you. I usually do that before I email something out or quickly before I save the workbook and close it. So the next time I open up, it's nice and clean. Now that I actually have these headers in place where I put week 1 and week 2, I want to continue on by adding in week 3 and week 4 in these cells. But in order to do that, I'm going to take advantage of a tool called AutoFill. Now, I want you all to know that every cell that you have a cell address box on has this little square, a green one, on the corner of it. That's the autofill handle. And what it's going to do is it's going to help you. If you have a word and a number, it's going to increment that number next to the word. So I can have week 4, week 5, quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3. I can do months, I can do days. Let me go ahead and expand this here. I'm going to make it to week 3, and I'm going to make it to week 4. Now, a lot of people are new to this when they use the autofill handle. Please make sure that when you are using it, that you're making sure to see the visual indicator that you're on top of the autofill handle by looking at the skinny black crosshair before left-clicking and holding and dragging across. Looking good, looking good. So, there's something I want to do here to my headers. Currently, I have my headers in, but what I want to do is I want to highlight them. I want to highlight all of these headers so that I can align them in the middle of the cell for each one of these cells. And in order to actually do that, it's a really simple process, but I want to talk about keyboard shortcuts to do things, because this is definitely where the power of efficiency comes in. In real life, you might have 50, 60, you might have a whole year's worth of data that you're highlighting, not just 4 weeks. And knowing these keyboard shortcuts will save an immense amount of time when highlighting things. So if I needed to highlight this top row from the very start here, I can always use Control-Shift, and then I can choose a directional arrow. And it'll highlight in that direction until it meets a blank cell. Let me try that out. Control-Shift to the right. I like. And of course, I can always go to my Home tab, and under the Alignment command group, I can center these items here. Great. Now that I have this in here, what I want to do is I also want to continue by adding in the actual salespeople names. And then hopefully giving them some data, some raw data that I can put in that I have for the month. So I'm just going to add in some salespeople here. Let me go ahead and put my name as one of the salespeople. Here, I'll go ahead and put some familiar names that we might have heard of, maybe not. Keep it simple. It's a small staff, super small team. We're going to keep it with only 4 of us. So now that I have this here, I want to actually start adding in some data to my spreadsheet. So when I enter in data, I'm going to put my cell address box on a cell. I'm just going to add in some data, some fake numbers like 50. I'm going to hit Tab to move over to the right so I can add in 100. And now I want to talk a little bit about another trick that we want to take advantage of. We want to get used to it. It has to do with the autofill handle again. My autofill handle. Remember that thing I just used a moment ago where I highlighted a chunk of cells or a cell and this little square was pulled? Well, what happens if you do it with 2 cells selected instead of just 1, right? That's what I have now. It's actually going to follow a pattern. So this pattern is plus 50. So in these next cells, if I actually pull my autofill handle in that direction to the right, it's going to be 150 and 200. Let me go ahead and pull that. And of course, autofill tries to help as much as possible. So if you end up pulling it down and you have too many cells selected, like it's not going to recognize a pattern here. But it will help you by copying down the cells now. I'm going to go ahead and drag down here. So it copied it. I'm going to drag down here again. And I'm going to drag down here again. So I have some fake numbers in here, just some fake sales data to get the spreadsheet's template a little bit of a look. I wanted to see how it would look with numbers in it. However, this is supposed to actually display sales data. And what I want for these actual cells are for them to have a data type for the currency values that I'm displaying. And in order to do something like that, I want to actually use the keyboard shortcuts to highlight the chunk of swells, or cells I should say. I can always use the keyboard shortcut to highlight to the right. And of course, I can always use the keyboard shortcut to highlight all the way down. Now that I have this highlighted, I have multiple routes that I can take to add this currency format. Now inside my Home tab, I actually have a number command group where I can toggle on the currency format and hide my decimal places. But I'm all about efficiency. And if you notice, there's actually keyboard shortcuts for many things that we're talking about today. And if you want, you can always use Control-Shift and the number 4 at the same time being held. Remember, the number 4 holds a dollar sign to change those cells that you have selected to a currency format. That's pretty convenient. If you change it to 5, it goes to percentage. Date, time is 3, 2. 1 is general. Or 1 is number. Tilde is general. I'm going to hit the Control-Shift-4 there. Rather simple. Keeps it smooth. I didn't have to move my hands anywhere. I didn't have to go away from the keyboard. Now the final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to knock away these decimal places by holding down the Alt key and clicking on the letter H, because that's where the H key is. And then I'm going to click on the number 9, because that's going to hide the decimal place. And you can also do it really fast. You can hit Alt and then H and then 9 really fast, and it'll hide the decimal places. I've been talking for a while though, and I've actually produced quite a nice spreadsheet. There's not any color to it, but I have the layout down. I have the columns created and the headers in them. I have some sample data. I have all the salespeople's names on the roster. Got the title, the slogan. Things are looking good. I centered the headers, added the currency data type that I needed. Now what I would like you to do is just pause this video and catch up. If you haven't been doing so, pause the video and create this spreadsheet. Use those shortcuts. Practice the data types, adding in cells, hitting enter, hitting tab, hitting shift tab, hitting shift enter. Navigate around. Go back to the video and rewatch certain parts as you do it. But definitely practice with those shortcuts in mind. Hopefully I'll see you soon. Pause the video, give this a try, and come right back. Welcome back. Hopefully you had fun creating the spreadsheet, practicing the shortcuts. And now that we have some data, or some names actually in here, something I want to mention that we have available since Office 2016, in case you come across a word you're not familiar with, or you want to get some information, an article about something, there's a tool known as Smart Lookup, where you can always look up information using a Bing search directly from the spreadsheet. And of course, once I'm done with this search, I can close it. And it's just worth a mention when you have this cool feature known as Smart Lookup with a right click, or you can always go over to, if I'm not mistaken, the Review tab. And the Smart Lookup is available under the Insights command group. Very interesting stuff. They try to get you to stay in Excel as much as possible instead of hopping away to these various browsers that you might need to use with this feature. So now that I have this in here, I have this data in here, what I want to actually do is I want to build a column that tracks the totals for these salespeople. And in order to do that, I have to perform these simple calculations. A sum. I have to sum certain cells. And there's so many ways to do that in Excel. So many different ways. And I just want to talk about these various ways that we have available since this is a beginner course. Let me build a total column here. And I just want to run through the various ways you can perform simple calculations or even build a formula to do the job. Now, the most basic way to actually add something in Excel, or to run a formula, an equation, a function, is to start your cell with an equal sign. That tells Excel, hey, I'm about to do a formula, I'm about to do a calculation. And if you want, you can actually select the cells that you want to use in the formula by selecting the cell once the equal sign is there. So instead of actually putting the numbers you want, although some people do this, putting the numbers that you want, it's much more preferred to put the cell address you want. Tell Excel where to look. That way, in case the number changes in the spreadsheet, you don't have to go running to update the total column as well. Now, of course, this way might take a little time if you have a lot of numbers to add. And it seems kind of like a repetitive process there with even 4 cells. But if I sum up B5 plus C5, D5, and E5 and hit enter, because I'll go down a cell, will total to 500 as it should there. On the bottom of Excel, there's something known as a status bar. If you haven't heard of it before, the bottom of that software is called the status bar, where our zoom slider is located, and it actually shows us the sum is 500. When you have cells highlighted, of course. So another way of actually doing a calculation is instead, you're still going to need an equal sign, but this time you're going to use a function from the Excel's function library. It ends up showing you all the function names once you start filtering for it and start typing in a few letters. Like I want to use the sum function, and I can filter for sum. And once I end up highlighting it, I can always click on the tab key to fill in the rest for me. And this essentially allows me to highlight a chunk of cells within a parentheses so that I can use the sum function to add up all these cells for myself without manually adding those plus signs in. Those are repetitive tasks. You know, there's even a way where you can highlight. Remember, we know shortcuts. We know the shortcut where we can highlight something with Control, Shift, and the right arrow. I'm going to do that to highlight the Michael Scott there. And if I want, I can also do this thing where I can hit Alt plus an equal sign. This is actually going to use a tool known as AutoSum. You have to hold the equal sign and the Alt key at the same time. It's called AutoSum. And when I do that, if I hit Alt and the equal key, it'll actually run a sum function for me on the row that I had selected. The issue with that is every time you do it, it's always going to show up on the cell right next to it. So if you didn't want the answer to be right next to it, that wouldn't be your way. Now, of course, I'm going to highlight this, Control Shift to the right. And one final way that I want to talk about is using something invented. In 2016, it was called the Quick Analysis tool, where we can always quickly access a set of tools that are already in our ribbon, but one of those tools is called totals. And if I want, I can always select the sum as one of the totals there. It did make it bold for me, but that's always a quick fix by turning off the bold there. So many ways to do the same task, honestly. Performing a simple calculation or doing a formula, using a tool known as Quick Analysis. All these things are going to get the job done in add up some cells, subtract some cells, maybe multiply some cells. We'll play around with those functions coming soon, but the one basic one I wanted to start out with was sum, to just perform simple calculations across the workbook. Now, something I want to mention is I've been talking for a little bit. I've added a lot to the spreadsheet. I use OneDrive. You may be using OneDrive or another cloud service, but when you do save your Word files, Excel files, PowerPoint files on OneDrive, autosave actually turns on. I don't have to worry about saving anything because it automatically saves it for me. But I just want you to spend a moment of time, if you haven't yet, going to the File tab and saving a copy of the workbook. If you have yet to do so. Or hit the save button you've already gave it a name, just to keep and save all the data that you've currently added. You never know when you get an unexpected crash or a power outage. So, now that we've practiced filling out a totals row, before we move on to some other, I wouldn't even call them more advanced functions, just some different functions like max, min, count. I want you to practice. I want you to practice doing a formula by putting in the actual cell addresses. I want you to practice by actually putting in a sum function. Use your keyboard shortcut to highlight things. Use AutoSum, Alt plus equal. Use quick analysis. Highlight the cells and go to the square there. When you are done practicing the totals, go ahead and come back to the video and press play, and we'll continue with some more basic calculations, formulas, or functions that we should use throughout Excel. All right. While you were away, I went ahead and added a few extra cells in the spreadsheet. Let me go ahead and highlight these two columns. I just want to add some borders around it as well. I'm going to add some borders around these cells, because I want to actually use the sales data that I have, and I want to figure out some totals, the average, the max, what's the biggest number, what's the smallest number, and how many numbers are in the data set. Let's start out with the total here. So of course we're going to use the function library in Excel, and we've already used this one quite a few times, the sum function. Always remember to click on tab, please. It saves you quite a bit of time with these longer function names that we're going to see in just a moment. And with sum here, I'm simply going to highlight this chunk of squares. Remember, we have keyboard shortcuts if there's really large, but that's going to grab our total there. Let me go ahead and grab that so I don't double up the values. And I'm going to close the parenthesis. And when I hit enter, it's going to find me the sum. So that's 2,000. Makes sense. There's 4 rows of 500. In the average, there's also another function that I can find. And once I type in AV, I can go down and find average and click tab to fill in the rest for me. And of course, I'm just going to highlight week 1 through week 4 to find me the average of 125. And of course, the biggest sale is using a function called max, where I can highlight a chunk of cells, and it's going to find the biggest number within those cells. And of course, min will find the smallest number. Now count's the final one there. And when you use a count, what it's essentially going to do it's going to count the values, like how many values you actually have selected. So there's 16 values, makes sense. There's 4 rows with 4 weeks. 4 by 4 is 16. So pretty simple to practice these functions. Now again, a lot of times people, they actually go to the formulas tab, and you can actually insert functions as well using the insert function dialog box. This does take a little time to fill out for each little function, but if this is your way, where you use the sum function, you might want to take advantage of it. I'm going to hit sum and hit OK, and then I can go ahead and select the cells that I want to add inside this form. So that's another way of doing the same thing, the same functions. I can use the Formulas tab and go to Insert Function. And this one's average, yeah. I can always go ahead and select these cells and hit OK. I can do the same thing for the max. Instead of writing it in the cell with an equal sign, I can hit Insert Function, which adds the equal sign. Find the max function, hit OK. Select the cells I want to use for max. And same thing for min, if need be. Of course, I don't see min in the list, so I have to search for it. There it is. And I can hit OK. And from there, I can highlight the same chunk of cells. Let's do this count just to get all of them in. I'm going to type in count just to hit go. Oh, there it is on the bottom there. And from there, I can highlight these chunk of cells and hit OK. And I'm just going to re-highlight everything, and I'm going to go to the Home tab and add the borders again. So rather simple, whether you're using the Insert function from the Formulas tab or you're just adding the equal sign and typing the function name in and hitting tab. Both ways are there available for you. Great. Go ahead and pause this video, and I do want you to try these other functions that we have besides just sum. Now, before you go, I want to give you a bonus. I'm going to give you a bonus function. I'm going to go to cell E1 here, and I want to type in the date in cell F1. And I want the date to always show me the current date. And I have a function called today. And there nothing goes inside the parentheses, but they need to be there. And what that's going to do is it will add me the date inside of the cell. And tomorrow it'll say whatever date tomorrow is, and so on and so forth. So it's a nice function to go ahead and have the current date from your computer time displayed on the spreadsheet. So now that I've covered that, go ahead and pause the video, practice these simple functions before moving on. Now that we have the basics down, I want to do another formula. I consider this a simple function as well. But I actually added another cell at the top where each salesperson actually has a goal they have to meet. And it looks like everyone met the goal, it's 500. But I want to actually track that using a function. So if they met the goal, I just want to have the letter P for pass. And if they didn't, it's going to say F for fail, which none of them failed. They all passed. We're the dream team here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a function in our function library known as the if function. It simply goes and it checks whether something is either true or it checks whether something is false. If that ends up being true, you can do something. If it ends up being false, you can do something else. This if function here has 3 different arguments you have to fill in. The logical test, the value if true, and the value if false. I can always compare if this cell, F5, is greater than or equal to the cell with my monthly goal. So that's my logical test. That can either be true or it can be false. Now the value if true is what I want Excel to do if it ends up being true. I'm just going to say the letter P, and because P isn't a number, I have to put it in quotes so that it can display the character. And if it ends up being false, I'm going to hit comma. After each one of these, I'm hitting comma. If it ends up being false, I want to hit F, which none of us actually failed. And I'm going to close my parenthesis. So it's rather simple. It just checks whether this cell is greater than or equal to this cell. And if it's true, it's going to say P. If it's false, it's going to say F. But none of us are false. We all are equal to 500 actually. Now I actually can use autofill, that tiny little square, on a formula. Oh, that's weird. Someone failed. Even though it's 500. That's really weird. Let's look into this. Let's see why. So when I did this autofill, so this was the original formula, yeah, with F5 and F2. Autofill actually is going to change the cell address of a formula when you drag it down. So notice how this says F6 now. It's comparing this cell. Oh, and a blank cell. That makes a lot of sense. And this one was just a word. That's why it said fail. It compared to a word. So I guess the value of this word is big. But that's not even comparing what we want it to. It's not comparing the correct cell. So what I'm going to do here is I need to absolutely reference. It's called absolutely reference a certain cell address. I can lock in this cell address so that when I use my autofill, it will remain at F2 and only F5 will go to F6 to F7 to F8. That way I'll compare the correct cells. And in order to do that, I simply add a $sign around the F and a $sign around the 2. When I end up hitting enter here and I redo my autofill, you're going to see it all change to pass. And if I go and I just really quickly, I'm going to browse through these, they're all pointing at F2 because I've absolutely referenced this cell address to lock it in place. So it is kind of interesting to know that autofill works a little different with functions and formulas. They change the cell addresses within them. But in case you need to have them fixed, we can always use absolute referencing. In situations like the goal situation here, where we had one cell that needed to stay put and others needed to go down, we can always absolute reference one or the other. I do want you to try this out, filling out an if. This is as far as the functions I will go. I'll keep that as simple functions, but absolute referencing is definitely something I wanted to cover so we can get the basics of it down. Autofill, absolute referencing. Go ahead and give this a try. Pause the video and come back so we can continue on. Now, something that's worth a mention since we are using the newest version of Office is if you want to check if you're using any features that might not be available in other versions. So far we haven't. We can always go to the File tab and under Info, we can inspect the workbook. I'm seeing more and more something we have to use is check compatibility, just to make sure we're not using any features that aren't supported by earlier versions of Microsoft Excel. I can also have this turned on to check itself every time I save the workbook. So definitely run this if you are working with clients that are outside the org and you're using advanced features. Not many in this course, but maybe something like XLOOKUP or XMatch or the let functions, or we'll talk about in the more expert sessions or intermediate sessions. Those will definitely cause the compatibility checker to run a quick little check and tell you that you might not see those functions on another versions of Excel. Yeah, definitely worth an issue, worth a check, compatibility. And remember, it's always a File tab away under Info for check the issues there. Now go ahead and give that a try before moving on from this video. Check the compatibility issues just to give a muscle memory to find that area. And if you feel like you are going to be sending out quite a bit of workbooks to outside of your org and you're not sure what version people have, make sure to check compatibility when saving this workbook for yourself. All right. Welcome back. Now I actually just got a request from my team. It's more of my data analysis team. They told me that for their reporting needs, they really need a column that just has the last name and the first name separate in 2 separate cells so that when they're tracking things, it can go by first and last name. So they asked me to insert 2 additional columns here where I can track the first name and last name of each of these salespeople. I'm going to insert a row, or I should say a column, I apologize. I'm going to right click and insert a column, and it's going to show up to the left of whatever column I have selected. So I'm going to insert, I'm going to call this first name. And if I go ahead and select column C and I hit insert, it's going to show up to the left of column C, and I'm going to call that last name. Just to keep things short, I'm just going to put last and first actually. Let me go back there and just remove the name just to keep things short. And I'm just going to start typing in the first names. There's not too many. Starting 2013 and up, when you start typing names like this, it's going to automatically try to help you. It's like, oh, you're splitting the first names up. Super useful. It's actually known as flash fill. Let me go ahead and do the last names too. Super useful. Wonderful. And just to resize everything, I'm going to click on this triangle here and double click to resize that again. And there we go. I got the first and the last name in. Don't worry, in case you ever get a new salesperson, you could always insert a new row as well by right clicking, and it'll show up above the selected row. Above the selected row. But I'm just going to undo that there. I don't really want to do that. All right. So now that I've inserted a column, or maybe a row if I chose to do that, what I want to do is I want to move things around a little bit. I actually want to get this salesperson goal, and I want to move it just a little bit over to about maybe down here so I can keep the metrics all in one spot. Maybe in fact, maybe right over here. Just to keep the metrics in one spot. Yeah, or maybe even on the bottom of this area here. Let me go ahead and grab this. And I'm just going to go over to the border of the cell address, the border. And I'm going to do a left click and hold, and I'm just going to drag it to where I want to locate it. It's actually rather simple to do that. I can put it at the bottom here. I can put it on the side. Let me put it on this side here. Cool. Notice how because I had this absolute reference, it changed to the cell. It referred to the correct cell still. Wonderful. So there's my salesperson goal, and I'm also just going to add a border around that as well, just to keep it pretty there. Salesperson goal. I'm going to make it bold. I can do that to the date too. Here, I'm just going to copy the date this time. I'm going to hold down the control key and then go to the border. When I hold down the control key and I left click and I drag, it makes a copy. I'm just going to add the borders and make it bold as well. So now that we have this here, and I've moved around some cells, and I've inserted some columns, I want you to pause the video and catch up with me. Practice inserting these columns by having them show up to the left-hand side. Practice moving a chunk of cells by just going to the border of it and dragging it. And practice copying a chunk of cells by holding down the control key and then dragging it from the border. When you get a little bit comfortable doing those process or that motion with your mouse and keyboard, and you got it down, go ahead and come back to the video so we can start talking a little bit about styling, making the spreadsheet look presentable for printing, using themes. That's something interesting too. Go ahead and play around with this and come right back. All right, welcome back, and hopefully you had fun playing around, moving things, inserting columns, and watching FlashFill do its thing by inserting the first and last names and having it fill in the rest for you. Now, I do just want to spend some time talking about formatting, because we are looking at a black and white spreadsheet. It's going to end up being printed And something that I take advantage of when formatting things in Word, Excel, is take advantage of these style sets that we have, to where I can go to maybe a title cell, and in my Home tab, I actually have a command group known as styles. And from here, I can add in a style to mimic a title cell. I can also do that for my headings. There's also heading styles. This is using the Office theme. These are the Office styles. There's also different styles we can add. Here, I'm going to get the date and highlight it. I'll make this a check cell. No, that looks too much. I'll do explanatory. There we go. And I'll just make this a little bit bigger so it shows it. Normal, explanatory, and then date. There we go. I want to make it a long date. I just changed the date to a long date. So you can see it fully spelled out. Looks nice. I also want to grab these headers, but remember, there's a lot of headers now. So we're going to take advantage of that keyboard shortcut when we grab these headers. And when I do that, I just want to make this headers more dominant, that they're actually headers, by highlighting them and just going to the top, and I'll make them into nothing too big. Let's do heading 3 there so we can add the line to the bottom. All right, looks good. I'm also going to highlight these salespeople names, right? The salespeople names, and make them a certain color as well. Here, I'm just going to make these ones, here, I'll make them a little gray there. And I'm going to actually grab the data itself, week 1 through week 4. I'm going to make them into input cells because that's actual input that I'm putting in. And of course, I'm going to get this total cell and this was goal met cell. And what I want to do is I'm going to have this as output cells. As output cells, letting me know it's the output for the input. I'm going to grab this chunk with the metrics here. I'm just going to add a shading to it. Here, I'm going to do a nice yellow to stand out, as well as the monthly goal cell, just to add some color to this there. Cool. I also want to just grab this entire chunk here, and I'm just going to move it, right? I want to move it over to the end here, and I'm going to resize everything to make sure everything fits. There we go. So it didn't take too long, but I've styled up the spreadsheet rather nicely. Let me actually add some borders around this chunk of squares. Let me highlight the chunk. You can always highlight a chunk, the entire chunk, by hitting Control and the letter A. This will grab everything surrounding your cell address. Yeah? Control A. Everything surrounding the cell address. Now that I have this selected, I can always go and add the borders from the Home tab by applying the All Borders option to it. So this way it'll show up in the print as well, which I'd want. Here, I feel like this style is very close to the output style, so I'm going to change it. I'm going to easily highlight it, because you can always change these again. Instead of using a 20% accent here, let's go ahead and change this maybe to a blue. There we go. I do want you to pause the video, and I want you to practice using styles. Adding in any data and model, title, and headings, or themed cell styles to your spreadsheet. Try to use at least one of each. Once you do that, go ahead and come back, because I can show you how we can drastically change these color palettes and the fonts and the effects, if you had any, in the spreadsheet with just a click of a button by toggling the different themes in the workbook. Lovely. Welcome back. Hopefully you have a nice colorful spreadsheet now with a bunch of cell styles put into place. Not to be alarmed though if you're wondering why your favorite color wasn't there or certain colors weren't there. It's simply because of the fact that when you open up a workbook, by default, you are using something known as the Office theme. And in fact, under Page Layout, you can browse the set of themes that you have available. I have a Themes command group. And from there, it's going to tell me I have the Office theme set, but I have these different themes that I can switch to, which will change the font, sometimes the size a little bit, as well as the color sets that we have available within the styles. I'm just browsing to see which one I like the best, honestly. There's so many. You know, I think since this is a restaurant, I'm going to use the organic. That just always makes sense to me. Looks all organic. I'm going to go to the home page, or the home tab, and I just want to show you how my styles have completely changed. So it's rather useful to set cell styles that you want, and then at the very end, pick a theme that you want. Now, don't get me wrong, if you don't like any of the themes, that's also possible. But you're always allowed to change the color of the theme if you don't like it. Maybe you like the font of organic, but you weren't feeling the color. You were feeling some other type of color. Maybe this one here, median. So now what you did is you've changed the color for the theme. And if you want, you can also save this. You can save this as a brand new theme. So that the next time you want to build a spreadsheet, you can keep the same color set with the organic font. I'm going to go ahead and call this custom theme. Call it custom organic theme because that's what it's based off of. And this theme will be available in actually Word as well, where we can go ahead and apply this to our documents, change the font and the color sets that we have available. This will be available for all of our workbooks, the custom theme there that we saved. I do want you to try this out though. I do want you to spend a moment picking the themes, browse through all the ones that you have, see if you like any of them. If you don't like any of them, spend a moment and build your own. Pick the one that you do like, the closest to what you like, and then set the color. Set the font. And if you are planning to add shapes, boxes, images, you might also want to set the effect as well. And then once you have done that, in order to actually save and reuse that without always having to add these 3 toggles, go to save the current theme. That way it'll save the color, the font, and the effect with a label that you labeled it, and it'll add this new header called custom to your themes area that you'll have available across all of your workbooks, not just this one. Don't forget to come back when you give this a try. See you soon. All right, so I actually got another request from my team. My team is asking me to grab this top half of the data, and if it's possible to actually add it to a separate sheet in the workbook without the notes on the bottom. This would end up being used to maybe just browse the data, display the data, or just kind of filter the data. You just want the sheet with the data, not really the metrics on the bottom. Not a big deal, I already have it. It's just a matter of me adding a separate sheet. Usually when I have more than one sheet, I like to name things. So let me name this first sheet, Fast Food Monthly. And I'm going to go ahead and hit a plus sign here, and I'm just going to call this the data to add the sheet for the data sheet. And I just want to grab this entire chunk, the salesperson, week 1 through week 4 with the totals and the goal met. And we have a shortcut for that. As long as my cell address box is somewhere within that chunk, we can always use Control A like we mentioned earlier. Control and the letter A to highlight all of the data in that surrounding chunk. And of course, I can always go to the Home tab and choose Copy, or I can right-click and copy, or I can always use Control C. There's so many ways to copy. But I will end up seeing these marching ants Once I end up seeing this marching ants here, I want to go ahead and add this by going to the data sheet. Let me zoom in a bit with my zoom slider. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit paste. Great, and I'm just going to resize these as well, just to have the raw data on one sheet. And lovely, there I met that request, easy peasy. Now keep in mind, if you didn't want this sheet to be present, you can always right click and hide it. And when you want to end up seeing it, you can always right click a sheet and unhide your worksheet to see it and make it available. So now that I've inserted a worksheet, I've hid the worksheet, I unhid the worksheet, and I've moved data to the worksheet, I want you to practice this. Before moving on to something I call grouping a worksheet, I want to go ahead and I want you to practice moving the data to this worksheet here. When you do that, we're going to come back and cover a feature known as grouping, where I can add two sheets together and everything I write down will bleed on to both sheets. So if I copy and paste the title, it'll show up on both sheets. Welcome back, but I do have another requirement from my team. They're asking me to add the word internal in nice large bold red letters in cell A3 on all of the sheets in this workbook. Luckily there's only two, but I know of a clever way where we can add that internal snippet on both sheets at the same time. I'm going to do this concept known as grouping, where I can get both sheets and put them together by holding down the Control key and then selecting the sheets you want to group. And when I do that, it's going to show like as if they're both activated. There's my data, fast food monthly, and at the top it says group. And also a lot of things are grayed out from the insert tab now, because it's not going to let you insert something to two sheets at once. Just type. And if I type in internal, I can go ahead and set it to bold, make it red, make the font size a little bit bigger. Let me do that for myself. Bold, red, font size bigger. And I also just want to make it centered as well. And now that I've done it in a grouped manner, I can right click and ungroup, and I can see that both sheet data and fast food monthly have internal listed with all the formatting, all the sizing the same. I only have to type it once. Grouping is extremely useful for those last minute edits to a workbook where you have to add multiple sheets of data, you have to have the same data point into them, where you have to copy and paste data into multiple sheets at once, add a formula to multiple sheets at once. Very useful tool. I do want you to try this out, the concept of grouping something, grouping a worksheet, before we move on to the next feature, which will be known as freezing panes. I want to make it easier to scroll through the spreadsheet by locking the top rows of my headers so that they stay in place as I scroll. Very convenient when we have a ton of rows in the data set. Give this grouping a try. Hopefully I got you excited for freezing panes when we come back. Hopefully you had a little fun grouping those worksheets. I do hope you went and ungrouped them now that we're done with that. That's important to do, and at the top it doesn't say grouped. Otherwise it's going to be hard to do these next parts. Now what I want to do with this spreadsheet is I want to make it easier to browse through digitally. I want to make it easy so as we scroll, the headers don't get lost. Because as you see, I scroll to a certain point, I can no longer see the header names. It hides them from me. But there is a way to lock those in place, so as I scroll, these first 4 rows will stay into place. In order to do something like this, we essentially have to format the view of our Excel workbook. Now in the View tab, we actually have a command group known as Window. And a very convenient tool that I have placed in there is Freeze Panes. freeze panes will actually, if I have, let's select row 5, will actually freeze everything above the selected row. So if I end up doing this with row 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1 will be frozen. Freeze panes. And as I scroll, now the top is always locked into place. I can always go to freeze panes and unfreeze them as well. And there's also an ability to lock in a column as well if I wanted to lock in the salesperson names maybe. I can always select the column and everything to the left of the column will be frozen when I select freeze panes. I'm going to undo that. There also is a situation where sometimes you want to freeze maybe the first 4 rows and also the first column itself. And to that, I'd say you have to select the intersection of the two, of the row and the column where they meet. And if you have your cell address box here, right over here, and you go to freeze panes, it's going to actually lock in this area as well as the top area for me. So 2 areas in once. Let me show you that. And now I can go ahead and scroll left, right, and even up and down. And freeze panes is locked into place. I do want you to try this feature. It's extremely useful when you have large spreadsheets. But if you do plan on ever using the page layout view, very convenient when you're printing out a workbook. It shows you how everything's going to fit onto the page. It's actually going to tell you that freeze panes is not compatible with that feature, which we'll be talking about shortly. And this feature here will unfreeze the panes when I hit OK. And it just shows me that the totals, the goal met, and even the date cell are going to be on a separate sheet. Now, of course, I can always move things around. Like if I wanted the date all to be on one page, I know how to move things. I can grab the border. I can just move it a little closer there. And I'm going to make this column just a little bit bigger. There we go. So everything's still on one page there. I'm going to get the best fit for everything one more time. Looking good. I can leave this on this page, or I can move it somewhere else on the page. I can make the columns a little bit smaller to make things fit. But maybe I don't want this on the page. I don't want to print out this thing. I can only print one page here. Here, let me go back to the normal view now that I fixed the page and I moved the date onto one sheet. Yeah, so page layout view will actually disable freeze panes, and it even leaves this little marker letting you know where the page cut off, giving you an idea for the future if you ever need to make some edits. Extremely useful. I do want you to use freeze panes, and I want you to go to page layout view and then move the date, and then notice how you have the line and freeze panes is no longer on at that point. You can leave it off, that's fine, or you can leave it on, that's up to you. But I'm going to leave it off for the remainder of the time, and I'm going to go ahead, and now that we've covered the ability to freeze panes, print out things, I want to talk a little bit about how we can actually save the work that we've created and maybe reuse it for another month by adding in some new raw data. So I'm going to design this spreadsheet, make it a little prettier, and I want to end up saving it what we call as a template file so that I can always access it when I open up Excel, and I can re-add the data for another month if I need to. So I got a request from my team, and they asked me to make 2 different versions of this workbook. They asked me to make one that actually shows the total and whether or not the goal was met. And they also asked me to build another one without these 2 columns visible. So in order to do that, I'm going to take advantage of a feature known as custom views in my view tab. And I'm going to save a view with all the data. Then I'm going to hide some columns, and I'm going to save another view. So that way if we ever need to toggle between the two views, we have those two views saved and we don't have to constantly hide and unhide things manually. The very first thing that you want to do when using custom views that's located in the View tab is to always add the original view with all the data showing. So that way you can always revert back to it when you switch to another view. I'm just going to call this original and hit OK. And I've just saved a view. And now I want to hide these two columns by right-clicking and hiding them when they're selected. And I can save another view known as hidden. And when I hit OK, what this is going to do is it's going to save the two views. So if I ever need to go to the original and hit show, I can browse the data. If I ever need to print this out, I can go to the hidden and hit show, and I can print this version out. So this is a very convenient feature. I do want you to try building at least two custom views, one original and one hidden one, before we move forward there. Go ahead and give this a try. Come back and then we'll go ahead and save this as a template. Alright, we've done a lot to this workbook. Now if you do want to use this every month, something you can do is you can save it as a template. Templates are accessible directly from the File tab under More Templates. Let me actually save this document, or this workbook I should say, as a template by removing all of the sales data that's currently active in there. And I'm going to leave all these formulas in place because once I actually find and add these formulas, these sales, it's going to fill in the formulas for me for next month. But I just want to save the template for right now. Now this date is always going to change to the correct date, so I'm going to leave it. But the big thing with saving templates is changing the way you save the file. When I go to the File tab and I choose to save a copy, this time when you choose to save the workbook, you're going to save it as an Excel template file. It's automatically going to change the location of where this file will be saved. It's going to save it in a folder known as Custom Office Templates. And when you hit save here, you're now going to have access to this template directly from the File tab under your More Templates area. There will be a personal section built with all your personal templates that you can always pin directly to the front. And the next time you restart Excel, you'll actually have access to it directly from the Start screen or the File tab like I have access to it here. And that way, you can always get your monthly sales data quickly inputted, and you can always track the metrics, and all the format, all the layout will stay consistent. All of your custom views will stay consistent. And if you ever need to print out this, we're going to go through spell checking this and the print preview of this coming up next before we conclude Excel 2021 Beginner. Hang in there, we're almost there. Just a few more goodies on printing in the next upcoming videos, and a few more goodies on spell check. We want to make sure all of our words are spelled correctly and how we can add certain words to our dictionary if we need to. Now, something that is worth a mention in Excel, Word, and even PowerPoint is the Review tab. Before it comes time to print out something, I want you to know that you have a proofing command group. This proofing command group will allow you to run a spelling check, and you can go ahead and run it on the entire workbook from the very beginning, and you can either add things to the dictionary if it's a word that you want to not show up as a misspelled word, or you can change them to the correctly spelled version of the word, like my word average there. Once the spell check is complete, you're actually in good shape to print out this document. Now, in the previous videos, we did talk a little bit about how we can use the View tab to do a page layout view, and that's when we learned about custom views to hide those two columns that were showing up. But what if we had a situation where we had to print out those two columns? What options do we have when we print? We're going to talk about that coming up next. Now that we've done a spell check, and we've designed the spreadsheet, and we've saved it as a template, it might come time to print a hard copy to see how that looks. Before printing it, we have several settings that we can toggle to make sure we find the best print for this spreadsheet. Hang tight. Before we move on to that, I do want you to practice this though. Practice running a spell check. Remove a letter or two on some of these words and run a spell check from the review tab of your workbook. And then come right back where we're going to talk about printing a worksheet. So now that we have this workbook all finalized and we ran our spell check, I want to point out a print keyboard shortcut, of course, is Control and the letter P. That's going to take you to the print page where we can see a thumbnail of the worksheet that we're going to print and our print settings that we can toggle through. When I go over to Control P, I also have the option of actually clicking on the File tab and hitting Print. Just remember, it's always a keyboard shortcut, Control P, to take us to the same exact area. And something that we always have access to is our print settings, where we can always print the active sheet, our entire workbook if there's multiple sheets we need to print, or just a selection if we want to just highlight maybe a chunk of sales. Just the salesperson, first and last. We can always go to File and Print and change this to just Selection. Now we got a list of just the salespeople. So definitely useful print options here if we browse through them. I'm going to go back to Active Sheet. If you do end up needing to print out these 2 additional columns and you want it all to show up on one page, a great useful tool in the print settings is the fact that we can switch the print to a landscape view. This might add an additional 1 to 2 columns on the spreadsheet. If that's not the case, you can always switch this back and it'll print out on a separate sheet. Or you can always use a larger paper size. There is a catch to this. Your printer has to support that paper size. Same with margins. You can adjust the margins to have your own custom margins, but if you make them too far out, your printer may not support the print to actually go that far out. If all else fails and you need to show everything on one page, you always have scaling options where you can fit all the columns on one page or kind of shrink things to make it work. You also have rows on one page. It'll fit all the rows on one page. Sometimes it comes not even legible because there's so many rows that they squished in there. And we also have an option just to shrink all the rows and the columns just to make it work on one page. This is a last resort option to me, the scaling options, but overall I am glad they're there. So now that we've gone through this here, these are our print options that we have. It's usually recommended to first run the spell check like we did in the previous video. And once you're ready with that, you can print out a copy of this worksheet, see how it looks on actual live paper, and maybe post it to that bulletin board like we were talking about in the very beginning of this video. Give yourself a round of applause. You have successfully completed both modules of Excel 2021 Beginner. I hope you take the Excel Intermediate course where we're going to cover a lot about report building and more about text functions. Very interesting stuff in that session as well. Hang tight. Congratulations. You have successfully completed Excel 2021 Beginner. I hope you take the Intermediate and Expert session that we have. In this session, we did cover 2 modules. Module 1 was Excel Essentials, an intro to formulas and functions. And Module 2, we focused on formatting, spreadsheet design, and page setup and printing. I do want to thank you all for sticking through. If I had to put a name on my favorite feature, it would definitely have to be the ability to save templates. That can save an immense amount of time if you use that. So at this point in time, I just want to thank you all. My final thank you until the next video. Take care, everybody.